Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. Lucas, we are a decade old. Okay, not a decade, but this is 10 episodes old.
Right.
So, woohoo! I know that sounds
Ooh.
maybe silly, but 10's a good number. It's like you
Yeah.
just got to keep,
I love it.
Double digits.
Yeah, exactly.
it.
And we couldn't be more excited to have David Carrithers, a good friend of ours that we talk to off screen a lot. And we're excited to finally have you on screen today with us. So
Thank you.
welcome to the show. So David, I'm going to start out and have you explain a little bit of what you do. I know that you have businesshive.com and then you also do some work with Profitable Associations, Inc. Why don't you just briefly let the audience know what it is that you do in the association world?
Sure. At the high level, I help associations focus on developing their affinity groups or their value to both their sponsors and their members. And this goes to, things like mentioned affinity programs, but it also includes consulting for board development, board and strategic planning, facilitation of that planning. And then that's through my business hive. And then as it relates to Profitable Association Inc., we support a variety of associations on their sponsorship development and sales execution and now affinity programs. So
Gotcha.
That's the core.
Well, you were the person that sent us the association's laboratory report looking forward for 2021, which we then, of course, really appreciated, read, and kind of boiled down at least a few points that we saw in a blog of what we thought some of the trends looked like. But I'm curious what you took away from reading that report and how you're thinking about having your clients understand what kind of intelligence is coming out of that report and what we need to think.
That's great. Yeah, the first thing, one of the things I do is I'm constantly scanning the market, Aaron and Lucas, and looking for data. I'm a data freak. I love, more information, better. And when I came across that, I thought it was interesting because it's looking at the associations in a slightly different way. And it's almost looking at it not so much from the association outwards, but the association, which are, a lot of times it's the association itself trying to define itself versus what the market is saying about that association or association needs. So what jumped out at me was relevance. And it's that idea around, and I've seen this a couple of times over the last 15 years. So you remember we had the famous government shutdown a few years back and all the panic around that. The fact was, associations, I wrote about it and talked to a bunch of them, was they become more relevant during that period of time. They should be helping their members, feel calm, see a vision of the future. A lot of them, I told them, they need to be giving free memberships to, people who are impacted by it. So same thing currently. I think the, 2020 has made associations reassess themselves. And I think some of them are still asking the same questions. So relevance to me is, are you asking the right questions? And then also doing something based on that. And so for me, that really jumped out. And, the different questions they were asking. In the end, when you start going through and ticking off what they're about, and like you guys highlighted, self-organization, I think that fear has been there since the creation of the internet. It's like, oh my gosh, the internet's going to take our memberships away and that kind of stuff. And, any non-members and how do you engage them? I think that's a beautiful area of questions to understand. One of the things I do when I help associations do audits, I call members that have left or key industry people that are not members and why are they not members. And I get more from those conversations than I get calling everybody on the board.
Absolutely.
Because they'll, if I can get them on the phone, they're interested in helping the industry. You find very powerful things. So I think the same thing here. And then government advocacy is an interesting area. A lot of it times in associations or industry groups, it's, making sure their laws allow them to operate and allow, that their industries are not impacted by government laws and bills and so forth. But the fact is, couldn't it also be that do we understand the value that the government could bring to this industry? And so I give the example of the PPP, the loans, and how confusing all that was. And if you talk to anybody in business, like when they were first coming out, and I talked to like 25 companies I support, every one of them was like, we don't understand this. I've called my accountant, I've called the bank. You know, they're all confused. The banks didn't know, nobody understood. Couldn't the industry associations help clarify that? It helped take a leadership role in saying, this is how it impacts mechanical contractors, or, you know, this is how it helps band instrument repair companies or something. I mean, you know, can you not, how you do it. So those
I actually spoke with an association recently who was in that same boat, and they had made the decision, as a small association, small staff, that they weren't going to request PPP funds, even though they could use them, simply because it was so daunting, the process of understanding, you know, how to apply, how to get the forgiveness qualifications and all that. So I think, you know, businesses within associations, some associations themselves.
I agree, Lucas. And there's an example of, you know, finding ways to help the industry or help the association or what have you. And isn't that part of the role of these groups? These, you know,
certainly. Well, I've known you for a long time, David. You're a very strategic thinker. You've been a great consultant to a lot of associations that you've worked with. And you mentioned, you know, sort of asking those questions. Everybody spent 2020 pivoting their virtual event and figuring out, you know, what are we going to do within the chaos? But I like this idea of, you know, in the calm of after the storm, what are those sort of really pointed questions that associations should be asking themselves, and that are sometimes hard, right? You don't want to necessarily point the gun on yourself, but
right.
You know, what are two or three maybe of those questions that you've been asking associations or helping them work through more recently?
Yeah, sure. And that's a very good point, Lucas. It's, you know, as they pivot, the value that they thought they brought or they were bringing, perceived bringing in the past, pre-March 2020, is it the same today? And what I mean by that is, was the focus on, you know, generating once a year or twice a year, a 3-day event. And, you know, a lot of the associations were designed for that event, meaning, you know, event planners and schedulers and buyers and all that kind of stuff leading to this 3-day event. And if you break that, you know, you're not doing that. And some of them, and I did not recommend this, but they would just try to duplicate the live event online. Big mistake. You know, yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I don't want to sit for 3 days in front of my computer listening at talking heads at me. And then they try to do some sort of like, oh, let's raise a glass of beer and celebrate or whatever. That all fell flat. So I'm like,
I did that a few times. It did fall flat. Yeah.
It's a great, you know, that'd be the easiest thing to do. So the whole question now is going forward, let's say the live events don't happen right away. And even if they don't, I don't think they're going to be happening at the same level as in the past. And so I'm talking to a lot of corporations too, and they're saying we're not going to go back to the way it was. We found we can get as much done through the internet and other sessions, other ways of working with association groups, and that's a lot of expense and time lost sending our staff and, you know, money, and we really are not sure that, you know, we're going to do that again. So I think that whole question of pivot was brought on and thinking, well, 2021 will be just like it was in 2019. You know, we'll get back to the way it was. Right. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's, you know, and I'll say that. And it's interesting. Some get very defensive, you know, like wanting to defend this past vision. And I'm saying I'm not saying there aren't going to be live events or one-on-one events, but I think the value has to shift from 3 days. So if I was a member and I've gone through this, I had a small business, or I'm a member of a school district, or I'm whatever, everything I've gone through, did my association help me with every day in some way, whether that's educating me, informing me, just mentally helping me, you know, see the world that, you know, that I'm in, and how to deal with it. So that shift from 3 days to 365 days a year of value. Yeah. How do you do that? And how do you bring that kind of value? And I'll ask that.
I think that what I think you bring up is a really interesting point too, because I think everyone's correct that 2021 is going to remain in this very strange time, and maybe even the first half of 2022 is going to still be everyone sort of feeling it out. I think if nothing else, to me at least, what the great pivot of 2020 should lead us all to be thinking, and I'm wondering how often these types of conversations are coming up, is strategy planning in the short, mid, and long term. Like, have people gotten too stuck in making immediate strategy decisions based on what they just know their calendar is? Oh, we always have this big event and we always do this and that. And or have they gotten now they're like midterm, everyone can only see 12 months ahead of time, 12 to 18 months ahead of time, and they're prognosticating on what's going to happen. And really we need to be looking down the road. There needs to be a 6 to 12 month plan, there needs to be a 12 to 18 month plan, but for sure we don't want to get blindsided again by something different knocking us off our feet in 3 years. And that's what actually happened. What happened was that people got complacent and relying on things that could change in a heartbeat of a traumatic situation like a pandemic. I'm just curious how often you're pointing people not only to the immediate, let's change to 365 model, but how does that 365 model look in 18 months to 2 years from now, not just the remainder of this year?
Yes, great point, Erin. So right at the start of all this pandemic, I got a call from an old partner at a construction company that I helped. And the president called me and he said, hey, I just was going through some old papers and I pulled out your old strategic plans. And in 2006, you raised the question to the board, what happens if we have a pandemic? What would the company look like? How will we operate? He goes, and we all laughed at you like, hey, what are you talking about? We're going to build stuff. So the same thing here. I think, people are very focused right now on this time. And I say, use it to your advantage to reshape yourself. And I think every association can do that, ask that question, how do we reshape ourselves? And one of the ways is, are you really strategic planning or are you just event planning? And while both are important, it's how do you go to that strategic level? And a lot of people don't know how to operate in that. Sure. And so, I always recommend bring somebody in who understands the industries or understands how association operates, but is not from, within, because what happens is you just create group speak and everybody agrees. And yes, that's how we've always done it. I always say what made you successful in the past most likely will not make you successful in the future. Right. And that's a very hard, kind of question to shift into. So for strategy, that's where I start. What is strategy to the association? A lot of times they start talking about budget, or they talk about, again, in the past we did these events. I'm like, stop. What is the street? So one of the things that I'm seeing that I don't think the industry has a lot of depth in is how do associations work together? So do you have a lot of times they'll say, well, that's kind of a competition, or that's, they're not as sophisticated as we are, or technical as we are, or whatever. And I'm always like, yeah, but if they're trying to go for the same dollar that you're going for, work together on it. And so that's one thing. I use that as a way to talk about strategy. How would you do that? How would you look at who would you team with or partner with? How would you market together? How would you say, can we hold joint events together? Those kind of things. And it's, takes a little time for people to get their head around that, because everybody's so used to being on their own and doing it on their own. So
that would be an interesting conversation, though, and I could see that working in a small group setting. If you could pull a small group of associations together, and maybe you find a common ground at their size or maybe even their industry, having conversations around how you can collaborate. Everybody's going to have their own unique operating procedure, but there's a universal language of value where in that type of setting, I could see you, David, being really helpful in just poking the questions. How are you being value? How are you providing value today, in 6 months, in 12 months? Have you thought about your strategic roadmap? How are the events and everything else that you're planning tying into the overall message of value. So I think that's be an interesting conversation.
And a lot of I do too is I like to go find data beforehand and bring it to the group and reveal it. And a lot of times it's available data, information out there, and it may be on a consumer level, it may be on an industry level, it may be in the competing industry, you know, and how do you look at that? It usually leads to interesting conversations. And like, you know, Lucas, you know, 80% of the association industry is made up of associations with, you know, organizations with less than 15,000 members, you know, and, you know, those size groups are all under pressure from their members and their sponsors of why do I stay involved with you or what have you.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I love this conversation. I'm going to wrap it up because we need to leave something for people to call David about. And I really love this idea of this scalable resource, this objective resource. You know, again, in a time where associations out there right now are really having to bear down on their assets and resources that they have to just power through and survive, knowing that people like you are out there in the industry who can really speak with them, help them strategically pull back up to the 20,000, 30,000 foot view, I think would really help everyone know that they're not in it alone and that there are resources that they can tap into to get that broader perspective and offer the hand that can maybe help bridge some of those conversations they'd be uncomfortable having in the beginning. So thank you so much, David, for sharing your knowledge today and for sharing the association's laboratory report. We're actually going to hopefully talk to them in a future episode as well.
That's great.
But before we let you leave, of course, we always end our episodes to further the industry's purpose here and our purpose of making sure we get to know more people and share more people like you with our audience. Who would you have us talk to that you know in the association industry?
I would recommend talking with Dave Peckinpah. He's the president of Merit's Global Events. But Dave has like a history in the industry that goes back to, you know, helping with venues. So like promoting the city of San Diego. And he's well recognized in the industry as a leader.
Great.
And I think he could give insight into, you know, larger organizations supporting associations.
Awesome. Well, David, we're going to come talk to you later, and we appreciate you being a part of our team here. We love talking to you.
Love talking to you guys too.
Yeah, say hi to Patrick for us.
I will do that.
Yeah, and thank you, Lucas, for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, David. We didn't get a chance to touch on affinity programs, but that's a continued conversation partnership between us. So I know it won't go a couple of days.
Oh yeah, we got to get the powerhouse back on here. I'm gonna make the screen busier. We're gonna have to get a few of you guys really powwowing about that.
That would be fun. That would be fun. Have a great one.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, David.